Today we'll be looking at the Directory and the impact that it had in the years after the fall of Robespierre in July of 1795, right, with the Thermidorian reduction, and the outcomes that are brought in by this new five-person executive branch and the Constitution of Year 3. So let's just do a little background on sort of where we've been, right? So the French Revolution as a phenomenon begins in the spring, early summer of 1789, where because of bankruptcy, because of backlash from the nobility, because of backlash from the peasants, over spending and this rising bourgeoisie, educated, wealthy class, there is this emergence of a financial crisis within the French Empire. And Louis XVI needs to call in the Estates General, which meets starting in early May 1789. Now, because of the antiquated estate system that existed in France, stretching back hundreds of years, right? When it meets in May of 1789, this is the first time that this body has met in 175 years, since 1615. Now, this first meeting that occurs in May, right, for 6 weeks, nothing happens, right? There's a lot of deliberations and a lot of conversations, and the bourgeoisie, the third estate, does not get any success out of it. And then in June of 1789, the third estate is removed or removes itself, then is locked out of the Estates General, which then leads them to be called the National Assembly. And it is the Abbé Sieyès, who is himself a priest and would have been in the first estate, calls them the National Assembly and seeks to sort of think of this group of people, the people who represent, this new body, as being the representative of the nation. They declare at that point the oath of the tennis court oath, right, which famously declares that the National Assembly will continue to meet until there is a constitution. It's important to realize that at that point, there's no attempted revolution. It's really just reform that they're looking for. In the fall of 1789, the monarch, Louis XVI, and his wife and his family are moved out of the Palace of Versailles and are moved into Paris. They're put in the Tuileries Palace, which is currently sort of close to where the Louvre would be in Paris itself, downtown Paris. And this is the last time they were at Versailles. They're now really under house arrest in the Tuileries. Now, out of this, right, emerges other laws that go into effect: the civil constitution of the clergy, sort of removing the power of the Catholic Church and making them really all state officials. And again, we have continued sort of suppression and repression of those privileged estates, the first and the second estate. Louis XVI tries to flee in the summer of 1791. He is ultimately arrested, brought back to Paris, put on trial, and then beheaded after that. What occurs next is the Reign of Terror, which I said 1795 earlier, which goes from 1793 on September 1793 until July of 1794, when Robespierre is killed, and we have the Thermidorian reaction, sort of the reduction of tensions, and people start looking for more steady, controlled leadership within the government. And as a result, you have the passage of the Constitution of Year 3. Now, the Constitution of Year 3 seeks to, again, preserve some of the ideas of democracy and preserve some of the ideas of democracy and open up a little bit more voting, but overall, we're still not talking about a ton of people that are going to be allowed to vote. Now, the republic, right, this idea of a republic, which had gotten a lot of leverage throughout the early portion of the revolution, was not necessarily successful here. The republic scared a lot of people, right? The Thermidor, the Republic of 1793, 1794 that saw the killings of thousands of people really scared a lot of people. But the republic that would come after that also scared moderates, right? There was, in a peacetime, we can go back to having a monarchy. And this new constitution that is put through ignores that. So that there's, in order to vote, you have to be over 21. In order to vote, you had to have a certain amount of property, which then could be taxed at a higher rate, meaning that most of the people in the country are not eligible to vote. We're talking about less than 300,000 people being eligible to vote in a country of about 30 million people, right? So we're talking a very, very small minority of the folks. Now, the Directory comes into power in the Constitution of Year 3. This Constitution of Year 3, again, sets out a new executive branch that replaces the Committee on Public Safety, and you have 5 men who are elected to it. Each one would be replaced every year, and you were not eligible. So if you were the 5th person and you were replaced, you're not eligible until another year, so that they sort of permits some sort of limited power. There's also 2 sort of bodies of legislators, the Council of Elders and the Council of 500, that would exist to make sure laws are equitable. This sees an emergence of a moderate group, right? A group of people who could be Republicans and seek the that's smaller Republicans, right? Republicans seeking to bring about a republic, right? A country without a monarchy. But then you also have another group of people who are monarchists, but they're constitutional monarchists. And the goal here, right, for these moderates is to try and preserve some sort of semblance of law and order, status, but there's also an idea here of meritocracy. Now, the moderates have strength, right, because they're still at war with a lot of people. The French Republic at the end of the 1790s, right? Austria is still attacking on the east. You still have the British fighting in the west off the coast of northwestern France. And all of this, right, is pushing people to the middle, pushing people to the moderate cause. And there's also a growing sort of, because religion was, France was a Catholic country, and Robespierre creates the cult of the supreme being and limits the power of the Catholic Church. When the Pope recognizes Joseph Bonaparte and an ambassador from France, there is this idea that there's going to be a push for some moderate causes, bringing back some pieces of the old French. And this is the first time that the Pope recognizes a diplomat that is not from an expressly religious country, which is an important thing to note here, that Pius VI in this example is just not focusing on sort of the needing to bring back the sort of old days of Catholic Church supremacy. And there's also, within France in general, there's a focus on a separation between church and state. There was a desire to, bring back some of those émigré bishops, have those bishops that had run away from the French Revolution to sort of literally save their necks, bring them back. There's an election in March of 1797, which the Directory loses which within the Council of Elders and the 500, there's a massive reduction of the Directory strength. This creates a situation where the Directory is really going to want to preserve its power. Obviously, they don't want to give up their authority. So what happens is there is more fear among the Directory that they are going to lose their authority, and they become basically more conservative, although they're basically advocating for the preservation of their power and not preservation of other people's power. All of this becomes even more risky when something called the Conspiracy of Equals becomes known. So in 1796, a guy by the name of, or a guy who called himself Gracchus Babeuf, tries to overthrow the government. And he's using a lot of sort of communist ideas that would emerge more powerfully in the 1840s and 50s. But he's attempting to overthrow the government and create a process of land collectivization, strip away the old relics of noble power, which was obviously land and wealth held in that land. And he is very successful, right? He has a lot of people who follow him. And there are journalists that are writing a lot about him and his ideas. And again, all of this is making a lot of people fearful, right? Because for that bourgeoisie class, that new emerging, powerful, educated class, one of the things that gives them their wealth is that they own property, right? And when you have this group of people, these lower class folk, these sort of radical communists, socialists, come in, right? If they're saying we need to get rid of land, for the folks who own their land and that this is their wealth, obviously they don't want to get rid of that. So what happens here is there's an emergence of a fear among that sort of middle class group that are not willing to go along with Gracchus Babeuf and his colleagues. So this is broken up on May 10th, 1796, and Babeuf is arrested. His conspirators are arrested, and he winds up being put to death. His colleagues, not all of them are, only one or two are, and his legacy becomes one that people write about for the next 40, 50 years, and his ideas will come back up, and he's like sort of the patron saint of this in the 1830s and the 1840s. Again, there is a swing in this more moderate sense, and at least in some ways into a constitutional monarchy. There is a desire, as emigres are coming back at the end of the 1790s, to restore the Bourbon monarchy, to bring back a constitutional form of government. The king at the time was the person who called himself the king, that was a king in exile, I suppose, was Louis XVIII. And he doesn't do himself any favors. So Louis XVIII, he will ultimately become the king after 1815. But at this point, he's really trying to make a petition to bring himself back. And, he could have taken a more moderate tone, but he decided not to. He really doubled down on this sort of idea of royalism and of conservatism. And he, for the people who had purchased assignats, that sort of revolutionary currency, he offers no assistance for them, right? This is bankrupted currency worth 10% of its face value or something. And he's saying that there will be this is stolen land. This is stolen money that you have created. So I will give you no benefit for that. And then he also says, I will give no, you have broken your promises with God and you have destroyed the throne of your king. And, this scares a lot of people. Right, so if you think about the political situation that these folks are in, right, in the 1790s France, right, you've gotten the sort of craziness of the Thermidor, of the Reign of Terror, the moderating tone of the Thermidorian Reduction, the bringing in of this Directory, the conspiracy of equals, and the destruction of property. You have a king who is in exile in Italy, trying to say, that if I come back, we're going back to the old ways. It's just got to be such a frightful period. And into this, you have folks like Talleyrand and other political operatives within the French government that are working to try and provide some sort of security and some sort of stability. But Talleyrand, right? So Talleyrand was a former bishop. So his family was an old noble family. He was sort of his father was the second son of that family. So they wouldn't have really been all that powerful. He would not have been all that powerful. But one of the ways for him to have gotten success, right, would have been in the military. He was born with a limp, so he couldn't fight in the military. So the only other real place that he could get some power was in the church. So he is ordained a bishop right away. He never becomes a priest, but he's really just a terrible priest. He doesn't believe anything that he says. And as a priest, right, he flees during the Reign of Terror to try and save his head. But he's just a manipulative guy. And when he comes back from exile in 1797, he works exclusively to preserve the power of the Directory. And he sees Napoleon Bonaparte as his guy. Napoleon had a lot of success in Egypt and in the Mediterranean, and when he comes back to France, Talleyrand is famously reported to have said, "And this is our guy, right? This is the person who we want to take over." So there's a coup of Brumaire in 1799 where Napoleon is put into power, and after that, two other members of the 5-person Directory had been kicked out. Their triumvirate, and then ultimately the consulate. So Napoleon is put into power as the first consul, and he goes around trying to establish, again, something called the Sister Republics. In Italy, in northern Italy, there's something called the Cisalpine Republic. In what would become Belgium and the Netherlands, you have something called the Ligurian Republic, or the Helvetic Republic later on. And all of these, again, are there to try and preserve these ideas of the revolution. Napoleon's wars that he goes on throughout Europe, in Spain, which I think he ultimately regrets, in Italy, in Poland, in Eastern Europe, he spreads these revolutionary ideas. And we'll talk a little bit in the coming weeks about the things that Napoleon does within France to try and stabilize France that are helpful, but as they spread, people in Italy, Spain, Germany, Austria, Poland are going to want these. And we'll talk more about how those ideas continue to spread and the damages that they bring.